What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith and you're trying to figure out how to get those questions answered. Maybe you don't have a friend, a close friend that really understands the teachings of the Catholic faith, so you're kind of looking around. Maybe you don't know any priests in your town, and so you're trying to get the straight deal. Well, we can give you the straight deal right here on Call to Communion. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside of North America, you'll want to dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response. It'll come at you real quick. And then just text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. Michael Birchfield is our producer. Ryan Penny is our phone screener. And Jeff Burson, a nice person, is on social media, so he will pass on any questions that you might want to pose via YouTube or Facebook. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
You know what? I'm doing great. It's very rare that I eat lunch just before doing the show. However, our son is in town from Colorado, so I thought, well, here's an opportunity that I never get. So delighted to have lunch with our dear son and my wonderful wife.
That's fantastic.
It really, really is. So we're going to lead off as we're getting some of these questions answered here. Here's an email from Rick in Omaha. Why do some churches... there goes a whole cup of tea.
I am sorry about that,
floor.
Tom Price.
It is okay.
I just dumped an entire full cup of hot tea all over Tom, who is now standing up, dripping everywhere.
It's all right. The show must go on.
And my notepad is soaking now.
We'll worry about that at the break. Here's a question from Rick in Omaha. Why do some churches have a crucified Jesus on the cross while others seem to have a flying Jesus who's kind of flying off the cross? Is this just an artistic preference? What do you have to say? That's from Rick in Omaha.
Wow, flying Jesuses. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
You've seen those.
Right. Yeah. So I think maybe you're trying to combine the image of a crucifix and the notion of the resurrection, perhaps. I mean, I'm just trying to understand that I'm not an artist and I'm not highly conversant with the tradition of sculpting crucifixes, but often that seems to be what's signified because you've got a Jesus with his arms outstretched and seems to be elevated or glorified. Yeah. But he's superimposed on top of a cross. So perhaps that's what's being conveyed.
It was kind of in for a while, wasn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Here comes some paper towels.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. I mean, when we came to town in 1997, there was a parish here in Birmingham that had such an artistic rendition of a crucifix, and it was there for a couple of years, and then lo and behold, one day it just went away. I think there was a pastoral change or some such thing.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted by the tea everywhere.
It's a dual purpose program here. We're trying to do the show and clean up this enormous mess. But anyway, there you go. And that is from Rick in Omaha. Let me grab another water-soaked...
Grab a dry question off.
Oh, there actually, David, there are no dry questions here.
Oh my God.
These are all wet. But here's one now. This is actually a longer one that we can get to. This is from Dennis. Our pastor received concerned feedbacks about a deacon's homily at several masses last weekend to comments about the same-sex lifestyle. Now, I didn't hear the homily. Deacons seem to be more proactive in their homilies regarding current lifestyles than the priests. I was wondering what your thoughts are about preaching a homily about same-sex lifestyle. I talked to our pastor about it. He seemed to sort of punt it away by saying he would work with the pastoral staff to see how they can address it and follow up in a charitable and grace-filled way. So, why consult with the pastoral staff? Isn't the Holy Spirit influencing the homilist, the deacon in this case, on his homily? That's from Dennis.
Okay, thanks. So this is an interesting question because I don't actually know what the content of the deacon's homily was. And I pretty much guarantee that almost anything you say on this matter is going to inflame somebody in the congregation.
Yeah.
So I don't care what you say. I don't care if you preach the church's doctrine, you're going to inflame the people that don't like it. If you preach the world's doctrine, you're going to inflame the people that are faithful to church teaching. And this is just one of those hot button issues where you're not going to please everybody.
Yep.
So you ask my opinion. My opinion is that I didn't become Catholic so that I could get the same stuff I was getting in the world, right? I became Catholic for the truth that the church has always taught for 2,000 years, and I would hope that that's what that the deacons are going to preach and what the priests are going to preach when they preach a homily, to proclaim the truth of Christ, and also hopefully give me spiritual insight for knowing how to live it more generously, more diligently, more faithfully, more gracefully. And the truth that the church teaches is that homosexual persons, like all of us, are beloved by God, created in God's likeness and image, and we're all called to holiness of life, which includes chastity. And we all struggle with that. We all suffer from concupiscence and disordered sexual desire of one form or another. And so the call to chastity is difficult for everyone, but it's difficult in different ways depending on your state of life and what other challenges you may have. So hopefully that's what the deacon is preaching, the call to chastity and holiness in marriage and marital life and family or consecrated life, if that's your vocation. And I'm sure that upset somebody. And the question, should the pastor consult the pastoral staff or, take a vote or, lick his finger and stick it in the air to determine how to go forward? Well, you can preach the truth more or less skillfully.
Yeah.
And and if that's the issue, if the deacon was preaching the truth of Christ and people took offense at how he framed it, maybe he could have done a better job. I don't know. I wasn't there. There's nothing wrong with taking counsel, and in fact, a mark of the prudent person is that he takes counsel. St. Thomas Aquinas says, that's almost the whole of prudence. If you don't know what to do, you take counsel and seek forward. Now, it might be kind of interesting. Why would the priest decide to take counsel on this particular homily and not on all the other homilies during the year?
Right.
There's actually there's a consulting firm that consults with parishes on how to do a better job just managing their affairs, that suggests that priests take counsel every week, that they get feedback from a kind of a select group of lay people. And how did I do? Did it make sense? Did you follow what I was saying? That's not a bad idea.
Not at
but
all.
But why don't we do it consistently?
There you go. Very good. Thank you so much for that.
Are you dry now, Tom?
I am dry. The show must go on. We're going to go to Jean Marie in Seattle in a moment here. Also, Peter in Lowell, Mass. We are live on this Friday after Christmas. Our phone number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Coming up tonight on EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn, they're going to be looking at the successes and challenges that Pope Francis has faced this year. Should be a very interesting program. That's at 9 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and Television. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Jean Marie in Seattle, listening to EWTN on Alexa. That's right. All she had to do was say, Alexa, play EWTN, and boom, there you go. Hey, Jean Marie, Merry Christmas to you. What's on your mind today?
And Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you.
I wrote it down, so I'm hoping it will be nice and organized and be focused.
Okay.
Based on my childhood Catholic school upbringing and exposure to the Catholic religion, I have been programmed to think that things are black and white and right or wrong. However, as I have evolved and I have experienced what I was taught is taboo, such as divorce, which I am, and having a son who is a grown, proud gay man who I adore and support, how do I move forward to revisit being a Catholic and blending what I was taught in my childhood Catholic upbringing as being judgmental and wrong?
Okay, thanks, Jane Marie. I appreciate the question a lot. So, first of all, let me just speak abstractly for a minute about the question about being judgmental or forming moral judgments, or things being black and white or right and wrong. I think you would probably agree with me that there are some things that are manifestly, unambiguously wrong. Nazism as an ideology was manifestly wrong. The so-called Nazi final solution, the genocide of the Jewish people in the Second World War, manifestly, unambiguously evil. There was no gray, no shades of gray, no ambiguities. It was just wrong. It was deadly wrong. And it was why? Because we're talking about the just cruel, heartless destruction of persons out of sheer hatred. And it manifests evil. So it's not the idea, I'm presuming here on you, I'm presuming you agree with me, it's not the idea of right and wrong as such. It's not the idea of passing judgment as such that you have difficulty with. Maybe some of the particular moral judgments that you encountered in your Catholic faith. Let's take the question of divorce that you raised, for instance. Does the Catholic faith teach that divorce is always and under every circumstance wrong? No, the Church does not teach that. What the Church teaches is that if two people are validly married in the eyes of God, that marriage cannot be dissolved by any authority for any reason, and that the parties have a moral obligation to seek one another's welfare and be faithful to one another. But let's say you're the wife in a relationship like that, and your husband doesn't hold up his end of the bargain. That's not on you. That's on him.
Right.
Now, if he doesn't hold up his end of the bargain, if he runs off with somebody else or does some terrible thing or it acts in a way that's destructive of your dignity or your humanity, that's on him, and he'll answer to God from that. He doesn't get a pass because of something called divorce.
Right.
And, very often when we deal with the question of divorce, this is the kind of thing that prompts the divorce. One partner decides that they don't want to be faithful, and they go run off and do something else. And when people like that call my show and they talk about their marriage situation, my advice is, well, quit running around and go back to your family where you're supposed to. I don't care if it makes you happy. It's the right thing to do. It's not about you or your happiness. It's about the welfare of your wife or your children. Go home and take care of your family. Man up. Do the job like you're supposed to. That's the kind of moral fortitude that we're called to live.
Right.
And I think that makes sense. If you're talking about somebody being faithful, laying down their life on behalf of another human being, the call to fidelity of marriage is a beautiful and noble thing. And again, if somebody doesn't hold up their end of the bargain, that's not on you, that's on them. All right? But what about you? What if you're the one who was abused? What if you're the one who was abandoned? Or worse, what if the fellow who's not holding up his end of the bargain is coming after you with a hatchet, which I have known to happen?
Oh, yeah.
Well, in situations like that, you might very well have to have recourse to a civil divorce because you need the government to come in and protect you from somebody who's getting ready to do you harm.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe somebody's not providing for you or your children financially, and so you're living in dire straits, and you need the civil arm to come in and force a deadbeat dad to come pay child support. And you have to have a civil divorce to make that happen. Does the church understand that situations like that transpire? Of course she does. Of course she does. And so there are plenty of people in the church who have acquired a civil divorce because of necessity for reasons that are really beyond their control, and they're innocent. They're the wounded, innocent party. Yeah. All right. Now, you talk about your son who's proud and gay. Well, the question of homosexuality is difficult, and it's painful, all right, because I think most people who are homosexual experience their sexuality, maybe not all, but many of them, as a burden, as a difficulty, as something that brings objective suffering into their life. Mm-hmm. And as such, they deserve love and compassion, as all human beings do. As all human beings do. And many of them come to terms with their sexuality and then decide to live overtly and in accord with their sexual inclinations, and then take on an attitude, as you put it, of pride. Well, I'm going to, put this thing on my shirt sleeve and wear it out there in the public, and I'm happy about it, and that's how I'm going to deal. And so they may have a subjective experience, a subjective state of mind of satisfaction with that way of life. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best thing for them or for the culture or for society. Mm-hmm. And one of the places in civil life where perhaps we should have pause when we think about that would be the welfare of children. Is it best for children that they be separated from their biological parents, all things being equal? I probably not. No. Children deserve a mother and a father.
Sure.
All things being equal, they ought to have their biological parents. Why? Because the people who brought the kids into the world are the ones that are the best equipped for caring for them, who have they're there, they're present. They have that biological bond, that genetic bond, even that hormonal bond that nature gives us to bond with those people with whom we're physically close progeny. Mothers have oxytocin flooding their bodies when they give birth to create those kind of natural emotional bonds. Why would we want to separate children from that, all things being equal? And when society normalizes homosexual sex and suggests that there is no qualitative difference between that kind of relationship and the sexual relationship of a mother and a father in procreative union giving birth to kids, then it leads to the kind of situation where people say, well, gay people need to have kids too because their relationship is no different from heterosexual unions, and therefore the state has to come in and create laws and structures that say, well, let's take this child away from at least one of its biological parents and give it to this couple over here so they too can have kids. And now all of a sudden, parenthood and childhood becomes something that is given to you by the state, ceded to you by the state, rather than something that emerges from the natural process of male and female procreative union. Well, that's a dangerous and slippery road to go down. And so there are consequences that may not at first be apparent. Social consequences, familial consequences, consequences that go beyond the mere felt experience of human intimacy or sexual intimacy, that can have downstream harmful effects when we completely normalize the experience of same-sex same-sex relations. Yeah. That doesn't mean that we should regard homosexual persons with disdain, that we should demean them, or that we should fail to treat them with dignity or kindness.
Okay. Jean Marie, there's an awful lot to chew on there, and we hope that is helpful for you. If you would like to listen to the program again, we encore it at 11 p.m. Eastern tonight, or you can check out the podcast by going to EWTNradio.net. Thank you so much for your call. And that opens up a line for you right now, 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. It's called a communion here on EWTN. Let's go now to Peter in Lowell, Mass, listening on the Station of the Cross. Merry Christmas to you, Peter. What's on your mind today?
Merry Christmas, gentlemen. My simple question is, can you tell me what is the purpose of and how do I find a spiritual director?
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate the question. In traditional Catholic theology, the purpose of a spiritual director is to help you discern where you are in the progress of your prayer life, and that is not something that is often obvious to us We are opaque to ourselves, and we do not know ourselves as well as we think we do. And the Catholic Church has a highly developed doctrine of the interior life and of progress in prayer, of progressing through multiple stages towards our union with God. And some of those states are quite nuanced and fine-grained, if you will, and it takes a certain degree of learning and experience to discern where the soul is in that process. And a spiritual director, ideally, is someone who is familiar with the Church's spiritual theology and knows how to recognize the progress of a soul, to diagnose where a soul is and what is needed to move to the next step in the life of prayer. How do you find someone who is equipped to do that? That's much easier said than done, because quite frankly, there are fewer people today than in the past, in the priesthood in particular, who study spiritual theology and are familiar with the language of the ages of the interior life. And so one way to go about it, lacking, in the absence of someone that has a sophisticated education in this field of theology, would be simply to find someone whose interior life from prayer you admire. Doesn't have to be a priest, but a priest is a logical person. If you live in the vicinity of a religious congregation, like a monastery, monks, especially the Benedictine community that we have here in Birmingham in particular, I know the priests that are there are very accustomed to giving spiritual direction. Very often approaching a monk or a religious, my own spiritual director is a religious, can be a helpful way of finding somebody. Or in the diocesan priesthood, again, if you see someone whose own life of prayer and interior life you admire, they have what you want, so to speak, in your own interior life.
Sure.
St. Teresa of Avila, who is the doctor of the interior life, she's probably the greatest teacher of mystical prayer in the Catholic tradition, said that it was more important to have a learned director, one who was knowledgeable about the theology of the interior life. That was even more important than having a holy director, believe it or not. But again, it's hard to find people that are well-schooled in this type of theology. So simply finding someone whose own interior life you admire and would like to emulate is a good way to go.
Peter, thank you so much for your call. We hope that's helpful for you. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We are live on this Friday after Christmas Day, and our phone number is 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Yes.
While I was thinking about it, we should have told the last fellow, if he wants a better understanding of the role of a spiritual director, Dan Burke of the National Catholic Register, who hosts Divine Intimacy Radio for EWTN Radio, has a good book precisely on the question of Catholic spiritual direction. And it's called, slipped my mind, something the interior life.
We will pull it up. Right. Navigating the Interior Life.
That's the one, Navigating the Interior Life. And his show, Divine Intimacy Radio, is all about this dynamic in the spiritual life.
Heard right here on EWTN Radio on the weekends. Got a text from Mary regarding the flying Jesus that we were talking about earlier. She says, our church has one of those, Jesus clothed, superimposed on a cross with his arms outstretched. It is depicting Jesus' ascension into heaven. Now, we do have a mural of the 11 apostles looking up at him, but I suppose all churches might not have that as well. So again, it is an artistic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there you go. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Scott now in Oklahoma City, listening on Oklahoma Catholic Broadcasting. Merry Christmas to you, Scott. What's on your mind today?
And Merry Christmas to both of you.
Thank you.
My question is this. I've got a friend who's Lutheran, and we share each other's faith on a fairly regular basis. And recently we were discussing the perpetual virginity of Mary, and I mentioned, that Martin Luther and Calvin and, a lot of the early Protestant reformers still believed in the perpetual virginity of Mary. He's like, well, let me talk to my pastor. Came back a few days later and said, well, we don't believe that. I'm like, yeah, but your founder did. So my question is, at what point did some of these Protestant denominations really start straying from what even the early Protestant reformers believed that was consistent with what the Catholic Church teaches, particularly in Marian dogma, so the Immaculate Conception, perpetual virginity of Mary, and maybe even when did they start transitioning from using a crucifix to the plain cross without the corpus? Do you happen to know the answer
yes,
to
a couple of different questions there. So with respect to the perpetual virginity of Mary, there is a Genevan Calvinist theologian from the 17th century who died in 1687 named Francis Turretin. And I'm certain, because I've studied the question, that Turretin believed in the perpetual virginity of the Blessed Virgin. Interesting reason that he gave. He said he believed it because it was an absolutely Catholic belief, Catholic with a small c. In other words, universally held throughout antiquity, and he could just find no evidence that any other opinion had ever been held, and he was not comfortable taking opinion that completely contradicted the uniform consensus of the Christian faithful all down through the ages. And that argument's in his Institutes of Eclectic Theology. So even at the late 17th century, that dogma was still held by Protestant theologians. I can't tell you who the first theologian was that absolutely denied it when it became commonplace, but my guess is it would have been 18th century or later. By the 19th century, probably pretty common. The question on the cross and the corpus, I'm going to have to get to after the break.
All right, sit tight, Scott. We'll come back to you right after this on Call to Communion. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Before the break, we were talking with Scott in Oklahoma City regarding the difference between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church.
Sure, and the question we didn't have time to get to was about crucifixes and crosses in churches, and when did this take place?
Right.
Well, within the Lutheran Church, you'll find crucifixes today. I mean, the Lutherans have been a lot more tolerant of religious imagery in churches than have the Calvinist or Reformed churches down through history. The Calvinists got rid not only of crucifixes, but of crosses too. They wanted to get rid of any kind of religious artwork. They literally whitewashed the walls of their church.
Wow.
And wanted no visual representations of Christian doctrines of any sort because they associated these things wrongly with idolatry. And so they didn't want people venerating the cross with or without Christ on it. Mm-hmm. But the principal reason they got rid of the corpus, and eventually you do see crosses begin to reemerge even within the Calvinist churches, but they never have a Jesus on them. They never have a corpus on them. And again, it was the fear of idolatry that motivated that. They thought that to venerate an image of our Lord was idolatrous. They were wrong about that, of course, but that was what motivated them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll hear modern Protestants say, well, we don't put Jesus on a cross because we know he's in heaven and you Catholics think he's still stuck on the cross. That's absurd. And the historic Protestants who got rid of crucifixes had no such illusions about Catholic doctrine. They knew as well as anybody that Catholics believed in the resurrection. What motivated them was a false conception about the need to avoid idolatry. Catholics, of course, understand that we're not idolatrous when we use religious imagery or religious artwork because we know darn well that's not Jesus.
Yeah.
It's a piece of wood carved to look like him, the purpose of which is to elevate our mind and thought and emotions to the truth of the crucifixion, in which lies our redemption, and to ultimately raise our hearts and minds to the things of heaven.
Yes, indeed. Scott, thank you so much for your call. We hope that is helpful for you. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We are live on this Friday. What is today? This is the first, second, third, fourth day of Christmas. Fourth day of Christmas, is that right? I believe it is.
Something like that.
All right. So we're live. We'd love to get your call right now at 833-288-EWTN if you have a question about the Catholic faith. 833-288-3986. Margie is in Buffalo, Washington, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Merry Christmas to you, Margie. What's on your mind today?
Good. Merry Christmas to you. Well, the circumcision is coming up on the 8th day, and when I was a little girl, that was what we celebrated on January the 1st, was the Holy Day of Obligation, the circumcision. Now it is the Solemnity of Mary. How did that evolve, and can you explain that a little bit?
Are you hip to that, David? Do you know how
Yeah, I honestly don't know when. I'm not an expert on the dates of the liturgical calendar. I can talk about the rationale for the feast.
Sure.
I can't tell you about the change.
Okay.
So the Mary has been venerated under the title Theotokos, or Mother of God, since at least the mid-3rd century. We have documentary evidence of her being venerated under that title from the 250s in Alexandria. And, of course, it was this title that eventually prompted the Council of Chalcedon and the Nestorian heresy. The Nestorian heretics denied that Mary was the Mother of God. Mm-hmm. They wanted to say she's the Mother of Christ, but not of the divine nature. And in doing so, of course, they opened the door to a really squirrely Christology. And that's a technical theological term there.
Squirrely.
Right?
Okay.
Kind of. Because it would suggest somehow that Christ's divinity was sufficiently separated from his humanity that you could have one and not have the other. Mm-hmm. But the Church has always said, no, Christ is really a divine person, so that if you touch the physical hand of Jesus, you're touching the hand of God. Right? The divinity and the humanity are conjoined in Christ without confusion, but in such a way that there is no separation. And so it's proper to refer to Mary as the Mother of God, not as if she somehow caused the divinity to be, because the divinity is eternal, obviously, in the origin and source of all things, but in the sense that Christ really is God. In the full stop, period, end of paragraph, mm-hmm. Christ is God. And that was the Council of Chalcedon. And this is an absolutely essential part of our doctrine of Christ, that we recognize that Mary as a Mother of God is essential to a proper understanding of Jesus. But it also opens up to us something about the dignity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, because she's the Mother of God, for crying out loud.
That's right.
And it's highly appropriate that she be venerated under this title, and that the Church recognize that with the feast day is a most sensible thing to do.
Yes, indeed. Margie, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. Here's a text just got from Joan. Can an older Catholic married couple take vows of chastity within marriage?
Right. I think what you mean is vows of perfect continence.
Probably so.
Because all married couples in the Catholic Church ought to be chaste, meaning that their sexual lives should be ordered in according with what God teaches about our state of life. Mm-hmm. And so for a Catholic couple, that would mean that they would limit their sexual activity to sexual acts within marriage that are essentially open to procreation. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what chastity looks like for a married couple, with periodic abstinence for the purpose of giving oneself to prayer. Of course, outside the state of marriage, chastity means no sex, period, end of paragraph. But can a married couple commit to a life of perfect continence? So the answer to that question is yes, but with qualifications. For a Catholic couple to commit to continence, first of all, and by way of taking vows, I don't know about the vows. The vows. They can make a decision to live a continent life. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure on the vow business, but there'll be some cautions. Number one, when a Catholic couple decides to live a life of perfect continence, that's extraordinarily rare. It has happened in the history of the Church. When they do so, it has to be with the complete uncoerced consent of both parties. That's absolutely essential. If one party says, I'd like to do this, and the other party says, I'm not up for that, you can't do it. We owe one another. The older moral theologians used to talk about the marriage debt. We actually owe one another the duty of conjugal relations, and St. Paul gives the rationale so that we won't fall into temptation. And so to practice continence, again, would be a little bit different from taking a vow, because, you can try it out for a while, see how you do. But if you take a vow, you might be stuck, right?
Yeah.
Has to be with the complete consent of both parties. I would also, this is my personal opinion, would advise that it not be done without serious spiritual direction, and for a very grave reason. And the very grave reason ought to be, really, I can only think of one that would be proportionate, that each person in this relationship is sufficiently advanced in the discipline of mystical prayer that perfect continence would be a sensible type of asceticism to engage in order to enjoy that perfect union of the will of the soul with God that is the end of the life of contemplative prayer. Very few people get there.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the mystical life. That's the Teresa of Avila's get there, the Teresas of Lisieux get there, the St. Johns of the Cross get there. It's possible for a married couple to get there. It's possible for a married couple to get there without a vow of perfect continence, because there's nothing unholy about living their marital life. In fact, the marital estate is a path towards holiness for most people. All right. And so that's why I would say you would need really, really, really good spiritual direction from a profoundly learned and very spiritual person who could really discern, yes, you've gone from the purgative stage of the mystical life through the illuminative stage. You are on the threshold of that union of the will with God after having passed through the dark night of the soul, and this kind of total purgation of self to which perfect continence is proportionate would be appropriate. Outside of that, there are so many neurotic reasons why a person might want to practice perfect continence that have nothing to do with the depth of the spiritual life that I would be very, very wary, and I would not take this kind of vow lightly.
Joan, we hope that's helpful for you. Thank you so much for your question. Glad that you texted us today here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. Let's go to David now in Scotts Depot, West Virginia, listening on St. Paul Radio. David, Merry Christmas to you. What's on your mind today?
I would like to know, where in the Bible does it say women will not preach?
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians, all right? On the other hand, the Catholic Church has never regarded questions of theology or theological practice or liturgical practice as being constrained uniquely by the Bible or only by the Bible. So when we go about thinking about how to order our religious lives or our life of worship, the Bible certainly plays a role in that, but it's far from comprehensive, doesn't answer all the questions that we need. And of course, the Bible has to be read within the tradition of the Church and within the Church's teaching authority, because the Bible can say all kinds of things that we can misapply without proper guidance. A good example would be 1 Corinthians chapter 11. St. Paul also says that women should cover their hair. But women should cover their hair. And unless you have the guidance of the Church and sacred tradition to know, well, how do we apply that? One person might read that and say, well, that's obviously something that's culture-bound and limited and, may have made sense in the first century in Palestine, but doesn't make a lot of sense today. Somebody else might look at that and say, well, hey, the Bible says it, we need to do it. And there's no way to adjudicate that dispute unless you can place that text in a larger context of sacred tradition and the teaching office of the Church. So, yeah, St. Paul does say in the first letter to the Corinthians that women should be silent in the Church and men should do the teaching. But that doesn't really get us where we need to go. We need more information about how that plays out. And the way the Church currently understands this is, well, women talk in church all the time. And thanks be to God for that. We have lectors in the Church who are women, and they get up and read the read everything but the Gospels, along with men who do the same thing. And
Sure.
women teach CCD classes and Sunday school classes and adult ed classes, and they teach in schools, and they teach theology in Catholic universities, and they get on the radio and do radio shows, and they found Catholic radio networks.
Yeah.
Women do all kinds of things, and they do all kinds of teaching, and a lot of it takes place in church buildings. The one thing that women can't do is women cannot preach homilies, because the homily is an essential part of the liturgical action known as the Mass, and the presiding over the Mass is the unique role of the priest. And the priest is, by definition, a man. So because of the connection of the homily with the sacrifice of the Mass, women are excluded from that in virtue of the fact that they can't be priests. But they can do all kinds of talking and preaching and teaching and all other kinds of operations within the church and its building, and even within the confines of the Mass itself, like lecturing, for example.
Okay. David, thank you so much for your question. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. I want to tell you about a wonderful book that is now available from EWTN Publishing. I'm going to reach for the book here, and I will not upset my teacup, I promise. This is a wonderful book, and it's called Reflections with Father Leo Clifford. It's a spiritual manual for living the Catholic life. Father Leo, if you're familiar with him, you know all about his wonderful teaching over the years on EWTN television and radio. In this book, he gives you practical ways to use God's graces profitably and intelligently. He will also help you to deal with many of the obligations and problems that arise as you grow spiritually. David was talking earlier about your own spiritual path and how you are to grow in holiness, day after day, year after year. This book will help you with this. Reflections with Father Leo Clifford. It's great. It's available right now at EWTNRC.com, EWTNRC.com. From EWTN Publishing. Very glad to have that under our imprint. Let's go now to John in Odessa, Texas, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hey, John, Merry Christmas. What's on your mind today?
Well, Merry Christmas, man.
Thank you.
My question is, the Catholic faith believes that Mary was a perpetual virgin. My question is, whenever she had Jesus, or Christ, the child, did she have it through the normal way, like labor pains and through the birth canal?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. The Catholic doctrine on this is that she did not have a normal delivery. She had a supernatural delivery without labor pains, and in such a fashion that she remained a virgin intact before, during, and after the parturition.
Okay, there you go. John, thank you so much for your call. Here is Jonathan now in New Orleans, listening on Catholic Community Radio, the almighty 690. Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, guys, thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
I'm wondering how long can we say, when does the phrase Merry Christmas start, and how long can we continue to wish that people have a Merry Christmas?
Right. So, Tom, you're better on liturgy than I am, isn't it? The Christmas feast lasts up until Epiphany, right?
I believe Epiphany.
Which is what, January 6th?
Yes. And we've been talking about this because various people have various opinions of how long the Christmas season is. I mean, you could say, well, it's the octave of Christmas. Or you could say it's through Epiphany, or some would say it's through the baptism of our Lord. And the list goes on and on. But I think you're on pretty safe ground if you say through Epiphany.
Yeah, and it's not like if I say Merry Christmas to you in July, you'll just give me a weird look. It's not like I'm in sin or anything.
That's right. You're on safe ground there, Jonathan. Appreciate your call. Here is Maria now in Fraser, Pennsylvania, listening also on Sirius XM 130. Merry Christmas to you, Maria. What's on your mind today?
Merry Christmas. My question is, through marriage and children having First Holy Communions and other sacraments, sometimes you accumulate multiple crucifixes. So what do you do with extra ones? What's the proper disposal? I just can't bring myself to throw it away or just hand it off to Goodwill. So
sure, thank you. So there is some guidance on how to dispose of blessed items, and they can be burned or buried. And from time to time, some Catholic institution will put up a new building, and I know we've done this in our diocese, and they'll often put out a call and say, we're getting ready to lay a foundation stone, got a great big hole, If anybody has blessed items that they want to dispose of in a holy place, now would be a good time to do it. That's but you don't always have new churches going up around every corner. But it's supposed to be it's respectful, and you could always bring them to the church for disposal as well.
Certainly could. Maria, appreciate your call. Let's go now to a call from our listener comment line.
This is Gail from Louisville, Kentucky. I just started watching this show. I heard David say one day that it was in Timothy about purgatory, and I was wondering if he would say again where in Timothy. In Timothy 2, it says it about purgatory. I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. So what I said was that St. Paul prays for his friend Onesiphorus. And let's see, isn't that in 2 Timothy chapter 1? I think it's 16 to 18, I believe, if memory serves me correct. And so he doesn't mention purgatory by name. He doesn't say anything about purgatory, but he does pray for the soul of Onesiphorus. And in the same way, in 2 Maccabees chapter 12, we find the Judeans praying on behalf of the dead. And so we infer from this Jewish and Christian belief in an intermediate state in which the souls of the deceased may benefit from the prayers of the faithful.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, I was actually doing some reading on this very question the other day, and not in the Catholic sources, but in Jewish sources that were drawing the exact same conclusion and referring to the doctrine of purgatory that could be inferred in virtue of 2 Maccabees chapter 12.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Appreciate your call. That actually came to our listener comment line, which is open 24 hours a day at 205-795. I had to go from memory here. 795-5773. That's 205-795-5773. You can call that any time of the day or night. If you have programming suggestions, if you have a question for a particular show, we will shuttle it off to that show so that you can get it answered on the air. Hope that is helpful for you. Here's one now from, looks like Richard, and Richard is watching us today on Facebook. Hey, Richard. He says, I have been attending the Salt Lake City Church. Now, I'm got to assume that is the Mormon church. And he says, I've been going to sacrament meeting every Sunday. What do you think about the Salt Lake Church or the Mormon Church? I do feel that the Book of Mormon might be true. Please give me advice. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't mean to offend any Mormons that might be listening.
Of course.
But I don't think there's any possibility that the Book of Mormon is true in any way other than the way that any fictitious book composed by a human author might have true elements or true themes in it, because that's how I regard the Book of Mormon. It is the imaginative creation of Joseph Smith, a 19th century Protestant fellow who put himself forward as a prophet and claimed to have revelations, and also claimed to have found this book buried in a hillside that he dug out allegedly on golden plates, and then claimed to have translated it using a miraculous pair of spectacles. And there's no evidence to support that contention, and quite a lot of evidence to the contrary.
Mm-hmm.
Smith made a lot of claims that are easily falsifiable, and doctrines of the Book of Mormon that are easily falsifiable. One of the simplest is the claim that the Native Americans were descendants from ancient Judeans or ancient Israelites. And modern genetic evidence has proved that demonstrably false. And Smith claimed to have uncovered other ancient texts as well, some of which had been written on Egyptian papyri. He found them and bought them off of an antiquities dealer, and claimed also to give out a supernatural translation. And it was impossible to falsify his statements, because at the time that Smith did this, we didn't know how to translate Egyptian hieroglyphics. And then we discovered the Rosetta Stone, and now we know how, and they don't say anything like what Smith said they said. So he was just making it up as he went along. And until he got killed, it was going all right for Smith for a while, because he managed to convince a lot of people that he was a prophet, and in the process he acquired a lot of money and a lot of other men's wives, as many as he wanted, in fact. And he would march in and pronounce that God had told him that he needed your wife and your daughter, and they would join the harem, and off they went. And he lived, in that kind of a way, and gratified his passions in a way that some men are wont to do. And no evidence that I could see that he lived a particularly holy life or an admirable one, and all kinds of evidence that he was a pretty successful religious charlatan. So I would not go in for that if I were you.
Okay. Richard, appreciate the fact that you're watching us today on Facebook. Looks like Gina is listening in Kirkland, Washington. She just texted us. My cousin remembers learning in Catholic school that the Jewish people wrote the Bible. I told her that I heard on your show that the Catholics wrote the Bible. Can you please address this? And I think the key word here is the word wrote.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the question. So the Bible consists in a number of books written over centuries by different people in different cultures and in different languages. Some of the books were clearly written by those who identified themselves as Jews. Some were written by people who did not identify themselves as Jews but would have thought of themselves as Israelites or as Hebrews, and so predated what we think of as the religion of Judaism. Some were written by Jews who came to believe in Jesus as the Messiah and would have understood themselves as Christians once that term became current. And some of those books were written by Gentiles, like, for instance, St. Luke was not Jewish, and he wrote the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts. So you've got a number of different authors from different ethnic and religious traditions. Paul, I started to call you Paul. What Tom pointed out, really what's determinative is there are a lot of ancient writings.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them claim to be divinely inspired, but only a certain of them make it into the canon of the Bible, make it into the list of scriptures that we call sacred scripture. Where do we get that list from? And why these books as opposed to others? Well, the definitive list that we now recognize as Holy Scripture was defined by the authority of the Catholic Church. So that's when we talk about the Church giving us the Bible. It's the Church that defined the list of books that we now hold to be canonical scriptures. Those writings, some of them were produced by Hebrews, Jews, Christians, but of course the whole history of the people of God, from Abraham, who was a Hebrew,
mm-hmm.
to Jesus the Messiah, is the history of the people, and in whom we find the origins of Judaism as well as Christianity. And the whole Bible, Old and New Testament, point ultimately to Christ as the fulfillment of all those Old Testament promises that those Jewish writers, as well as Christians, well, Christians after the fact, but
mm-hmm.
Jews looked forward to.
Okay. Appreciate that. And here's one more question from our listener comment line.
Reno from Amarillo, Texas. If the gospel Paul and all them preached, and God chose the foolishness of preaching to save people in the cross, why does the Catholic Church claim they're the only one, since God is sovereign, that can be saved? Does everybody go to hell if it's outside of the Catholic Church? Does the Catholic Church believe that God doesn't have the power to save other people in Protestant denominations or Orthodoxy?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. You have misstated the Catholic position. The Catholic Church does not teach that you have to be necessarily a card-carrying member of the Catholic Church in order to get into heaven. It doesn't teach that at all. So here's an analogy. If you catch a viral infection or a bacterial infection, if you lived a couple hundred years ago, you went to the doctor, they might have said, well, the trick for you is a good bleeding.
Uh-huh.
Let's go get some leeches and a knife
uh-huh.
and cut you open, all right? That's not a good way to get well.
No.
I mean, that's a pretty bad way. Now, did it ever happen that somebody applied the wrong remedy and got well anyway? Sure, it might have happened from time to time, okay? Yeah. The Catholic Church teaches that the Church has the truth about God, about the moral life, about the life of redemption, and has the means of grace. So liken it to a doctor who understands the human body and has the right medicine. Now, does that mean that there's no chance for you to get well outside the doctor that's the Catholic Church? No, God in His infinite mercy might reach out and touch you in a way known only to Him. But you'd rather have the knowledgeable doctor with the right medicine.
Absolutely.
And that's the Catholic Church, given to us by God for our salvation and redemption.
There you go. Appreciate that question from our listener comment line, and hopefully that listener was listening to your answer. Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Tom.
Looking forward to our next program. We will be live on the day before New Year's Day, which will be New Year's Eve, which is going to be on Monday afternoon. We'll also have an encore of today's program, Spilled Tea and all, and that'll be tonight at 11 o'clock.
Why don't you come in waiters next time?
That's not a bad idea. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time here on EWTN's Call to Communion. I'm Tom Price. God bless.